Although, even, if you think back to the run-up to the Iraq War, you could have said the same thing. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if Saddam Hussein had a nuclear weapons program, because after all, we threaten him all the time, and yet he just didn't have one. And it seems like they're rerunning the exact same case against Iran without evidence.
Well, President Bush just would not accept that, letting the UN inspectors go back in and give them absolute truth, because he wanted to go to war.
Mm-hmm. Well, but the UN inspectors are in Iran.
Yes, but nobody believes there are no weapons. And now the Iranians have brought everything and their plants, nuclear plants, up on the surface. We gave them the busters, whatever they call them, dungeon busters or...
Yeah, the bunker busters.
Bunker busters, that's what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, and now they brought them to the surface. I don't know whether it's to taunt others or what, but it's a very daring move. I think, the U.S. keeps threatening them.
I thought of another good question, if you'll humor me. You could ask them whether they still use the Mujahideen al-Khalq as a source of intelligence about Iran's, capabilities and intentions.
I could ask them. I don't know if he'll answer it.
It sure would be a funny one to watch him refuse to answer, though.
Well, we built them up against the Russians, and that was our entree to Afghanistan. And so many Afghans felt that we let them down.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the MEK, the guys who are holdout on that base in Iraq that used to work for the Ayatollah, and then they worked for Saddam, and now they work for us.
Yeah.
The source of the smoking laptop.
You got to make a living.
Yeah, I guess so. Even cult members got to make a living somehow.
There's no such thing as loyalty in these ranks.
Yeah. Well, Helen,
But why should they be loyal to us?
Well, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, especially with the dollars becoming worth less and less every day. Well, I want to thank you very much for being, after all this time, the most aggressive reporter in the Washington Press Corps, and continuing to lead the way and set the example for the rest of them to follow. Congratulations to you for it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody. That is Helen Thomas from Hearst Newspapers. She's the author of Listen Up, Mr. President, and is the dean of the Washington Press Corps, giving them hell up there.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom.
You know, I've heard this theory about, everything was just fine until we arrived, and kind of stir up the hornet's nest theory. It just doesn't hold water as far as I'm concerned. The terrorists attacked us and killed 3,000 of our citizens before we started the freedom agenda in the Middle East.
Iran, 1953. The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover. But that was before Mossadegh decided that the Iranian state, not British companies, ought to own and control the oil within Iran's own borders. When he nationalized the British-run oil fields, Washington saw red. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, decided with Eisenhower's approval to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. The mobs paid by the CIA and the police and soldiers bribed by the CIA drove Mossadegh from office.
Crown Prince Abdullah greets the Shah as he lands at Baghdad airport after a 7-hour flight from Rome.
The King of Kings was back in control and more pliable than Mossadegh. American oil companies took over almost half of Iran's production. U.S. arms merchants moved in with $18 billion of weapon sales over the next 20 years. But there were losers.
Nearly everybody in Iran of any importance has had a brother or a mother or a sister or a son or a father tortured, jailed, deprived of property without due process. I mean, an absolutely buccaneering dictatorship in our name that we supported. SAVAK was created by the CIA.
SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, tortured and murdered thousands of his opponents. General Richard Secord and Albert Hakim, whom we met earlier, were among those who helped supply the Shah's insatiable appetite for the technology of control.
In the after-action report by the CIA on what they had done in Iran in 1953, they said, we're going to get some blowback from this. We then made a puppet out of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who was a friend of ours. He was an asset in the CIA's computers. We did so because he was anti-Iranian. He was very fearful that the revolution in Iran would spread into his country. He therefore went to war with Iran. The war was extremely bloody, went on throughout the 1980s. Unfortunately for Saddam Hussein, he began to lose the war. At that point, in comes the United States in the form of Donald Rumsfeld, sent to Saddam Hussein by President Reagan to tell him, we will supply you with intelligence, we will supply you with the weapons you may need through covert means. It is why cynics in Washington say, we know Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, we have the receipts. This is what we mean by blowback. He remained a friend of ours right up to his invasion in the summer of 1990 of Kuwait. We became alarmed when he invaded Kuwait that he could also go on and invade Saudi Arabia.
Fast forward again to August 2nd, 1990. Iraq attacks Kuwait, claiming the Kuwaitis are slant drilling into Iraq's oil fields. U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush pushes for a land war against Iraq, but polls show the U.S. public is split 50-50 on that idea. Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths, not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.